ho paura. Allora parlo inglese. My apartment in New York looks out over a church roof. And usually the only birds I see there are pigeons. But recently I saw a bird that was bigger than a pigeon and prouder. It was standing on a peak of the roof, and its breast plumage kind of riffled in the wind, and it had something at its feet. I went to get my eyeglasses so I could see it better, and I got back in time to see the bird. I believe it was some kind of little hawk picking up the thing at its feet, possibly a rat, and fly away with it. So I took this as a sign, un augurio, that I should seize the moment and work on my talk for you. The ancient Greeks and the Romans, too, often interpreted the behavior of birds, looking for omens, foretelling the future, auguring. They assigned different birds to different gods. Zeus was the eagle, of course, Aphrodite the dove, Hera or Juno the peacock or pavone. Athena's bird was the owl, la civetta. This year, as ever, a Christmas tree was delivered to Rockefeller Center in New York, although because of the pandemic, no crowds of shoppers or pickpockets will be out looking at the Christmas tree. But wrapped inside the tree was a little owl. It came to the city on the truck with the tree as a stowaway. One of the workers setting up the tree spotted the little owl and saved it. It was taken to a bird refuge, a sanctuary called Raven's Beard, Barba di Corvo, which is in Saugerties. I know it sounds like I'm trying to say Socrates, but this is a town called Saugerties, which is from a Dutch word meaning sawmill. So they gave the little owl a name, of course, Rocky for Rockefeller, and that somebody gave it a sweater. The appearance of the owl in the city seemed like some kind of omen, a good omen, something like, hang on, don't give up, you'll find a way. The owl is on an odyssey of its own. So I hope it doesn't seem silly or frivolous of me, but everybody loves this little owl. We still see birds as omens or self-fulfilling prophecies. If a pigeon flies in your face and startles you first thing in the morning, it makes you worry that you're going to have a bad day. The sight of an unusual bird, though, or the sound of a bird singing, that can be a start to a good day. It can make you happy. I'm talking about birds because they are something we have in common with the ancients. Passages about nature in Homer are like touchstones or even time machines. We may not sacrifice to the old Greek gods anymore the way they did at Troy, but birds behave the same way now as they did then, and they have the same effect on us. In the Odyssey, there's a well-known simile. When the shade of Achilles comes to meet Odysseus, it's about bats, as when bats, pipistrelli, hanging on the walls of a cave, all flock together when one drops out of the gang. Then near the end of the Iliad, when King Priam is setting off to get the body of his son Hector from Achilles, the queen, Hecuba, is worried that Priam will get killed, but then she sees an eagle in the sky, which is a sign from Zeus that everything is going to be okay, and she feels relieved. So the nature scenes in Homer are one of the things that connect us to antiquity. The behavior of birds has not changed. The sight of an eagle can still lift one up, and the sight of this little owl can be reassuring, can be a sign of hope. So look at this little bird. It's one of the symbols of Athena. First of all, that a workman saved it, this tiny living thing, that he had the compassion and respect for the bird and mustered his resources to help save it, it just gives me hope for our species. Perhaps not all Americans are ugly Americans. Look at its eyes, they're beautiful, the ravishing pale green of their color. The bird is unblinking, it's alert, it's vigilant, it's ready for action. It's also ready to wait if that's what's necessary. It does not look as if it knows the meaning of the word fear. So the Homeric epithet for Athena is glaucopis, glaucopide. In English, the traditional translation of glaucopis is gray-eyed, which I believe comes from the Latin, from some early English translation, but modern scholars prefer bright-eyed, shining, gleaming, sparkling, twinkling, or even winking, and say that if glaucos does refer to a color, it refers to blue. It is almost certainly blue. In my quest to discover the color of Athena's eyes, I composed a Homeric catalog of shades of blue, ranging from sapphire to flax and cobalt, with shades that lean toward olive green, silver, yellow, and even gold. The word glauks is also the ancient Greek for owl, but it's mentioned in the scholarship only in passing and rarely used by translators. But now, looking at the picture of the little owl of Rockefeller Center, it seems obvious that glaucopis means owl-eyed. Not only are the eyes of the owl a beautiful color, but they convey so many good qualities. Watchful, vigilant, unblinking, able to see in the dark, able to see in all directions, as if Athena has eyes in the back of her head. Just for a moment, let us believe that because of the little owl, the spirit of Athena is tonight. What are the qualities of Athena that we can aspire to? Where and in whom do we find the spirit of Athena? She was the goddess of war and the goddess of wisdom. How do these things go together? They seem like opposites to me. Now, here is the statue of Athena. This statue is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. It's a marble statue, 13 feet high, from 170 BC, and it came from Pergamon, where it stood in the library of Pergamon. Representations of Athena always show her wearing a helmet. Apparently, this one had a plume, but it was lost. So the gods often had headgear, the laurel wreath for Apollo, a winged messenger cap for Hermes. Athena's helmet is practical. It is important for the same reason that a bicycle helmet is important. It protects the most important part of her head, her brain, her intelligence, her knowledge, her mind, her wisdom. In another slide, we can see the little owl on the helmet of Athena. This is from Piraeus. It is from 500 BC, and it is bronze, and there are many copies of it extant all over the world, from Sydney, Australia, to Abu Dhabi. Athena was born from Zeus's head. She emerged fully formed and armed for battle. Her mother is hardly ever mentioned. She was Metis, a second-generation Titan, or perhaps Titaness, the somewhat less refined immortals on whose backs the gods of Olympus came to power. Metis was Zeus's cousin. She was a goddess of wisdom and craftiness, a combination the Greeks have always admired. Furba. And she was a threat to Zeus, so he swallowed her. One never feels sorry for Athena because she was motherless. Far from it. Relations between mothers and daughters are often complicated, and Athena suffered none of the conflicts a girl has with her mother. This is admittedly a Freudian interpretation, but she had her father all to herself. She was a daddy's girl. Zeus respects her and indulges her and even takes her advice. She was born out of Zeus's head as if this were a good idea. From the beginning, she was a warrior. She has great feminine strength with no female anxiety. Femininity without sexuality. Fierce femininity. Her virginity is a virtue. No juggling of a career and a family. No jealous guarding of a husband from the temptations of sex. Nothing like Hera or Juno. It's as if Athena transcended sex. Another point about the head and the life of the mind is that Athena is her, going to back up a little and try this again. Another point about the head and the life of the mind is that Athens, Athena's city, was renowned as a center of learning. From ancient times, Romans studied there. People have always gone to study in Athens. Cities in the United States today have libraries that are called Athenaea. The Boston Athenaeum, the Hartford Athenaeum, Barcelona has an Ateneu, the Catalonian version of Athena. But there are other kinds of learning that are not from books, practical things. And Athena championed those too. Wisdom is different from knowledge. Wisdom is common sense combined with experience. It's also something that endures, that holds up, that lasts. The founding myth of Athens, you no doubt know, there was a contest between Poseidon and Athena for the honors of the city. Poseidon caused a saltwater spring to rise on the Acropolis, which would be a pretty good gift, and Athena planted an olive tree. Now, the gods chose the olive tree as the greater gift and awarded the city to Athena. What is so great about an olive tree? The olive is legendarily resilient and can live for thousands of years. Chop one down and shoots will grow from the stump. And Athena didn't just plant one tree and leave. She must have been responsible for the knowledge of how to cultivate the olive tree. Someone figured it out, and it must have been like a gift from the gods, like fire from Prometheus, but without the threat to the gods. Someone had to learn that the olive could be cured and eaten. It could be stuffed with little pimentos. The olive could be pressed for its oil, and the oil could be used for everything from cooking and salad dressing to a body ointment and hair conditioner, as well as fuel. They burned oil in lamps. The taste of olive oil is the essence of the Greek land, squeezed from a somewhat harsh, inhospitable land, a product of sunlight and stones, basically. It's concentrated grease. The olive is also a determined fruit. The cultivation of the olive is a supreme example of how to use your resources wisely, and that's one of the attributes of Athena. While I was writing this, while I was writing my book about Greece, I hired a fact checker to make sure that I had my facts right. It's part of my training at the New Yorker. And he objected to my giving credit to Athena for anything except the gift of the actual olive tree, because he could find no evidence for her teaching people how to use the olive, how to make an olive press. So people in the Dipartimento della Verificazione are famously literal-minded. Imagine trying to check mythology. Or imagine not knowing intuitively that this kind of knowledge was just part of the mythology of the olive tree, knowing how to use the olives and make olive oil. That single tree is synecdoche for the whole culture of the olive. So Athena is also associated with crafts, handiwork, domestic things, with the power of the potholder, say. She's associated with weaving. Maybe this is more the province of Minerva, the Roman equivalent of the goddess Athena. It is Ovid in the Metamorphoses who tells the story of Arachne, a talented weaver who dared to compete with Minerva and was changed into a spider. Athena doesn't come off very well in that myth. She didn't like people to challenge her prowess. But weaving, once again, is a way of doing something radical with your resources. It's changing something from nature, like flax or wool, into clothing or blankets, to comforts, to things in the house, even to luxuries. Rich clothing and blankets are often given as gifts in epic poetry. Greeks often bestow blankets on their guests or offer them at temples to the goddess. These things are both beautiful and useful, and they are things the gods have no need for. They are all purely for the benefit of mortals. So this is the feminine equivalent of what Hephaestus does with armor and jewelry. Athena is practical. She gives us household luxuries. I have a friend who makes potholders, who weaves potholders on a little device that she has. And she used these to put together giant potholders that she put in a frame and set it up in her garage as a stage with curtains. You can see a little picture of her stage, which I think is hilarious. So besides the helmet, what does Athena wear? We see in the pictures that she always has this thing called an aegis. So what is the Italian for aegis? Egida. It is literally, in Greek mythology, the aegis is a cape or stole, scaly and trimmed with serpents. It was the skin of the goat Amalthea, who nurtured the infant Zeus. She was his beast mama, after his mother, Rhea, hid him away on Crete to keep him from getting swallowed like his siblings by their father Kronos, who was afraid that his offspring would grow up to topple him, which they did. Figuratively, the aegis represents the power of Zeus. As Amalthea had given him strength, her skin became a symbol of his power, which was the power of creating thunder and lightning, which is one of the most violent displays of power in nature. There are also earthquakes and volcanoes and tsunamis, but Zeus's violence comes from the sky. Zeus shared the aegis with only two gods, Athena and Apollo. That is, they alone could rain down thunder and lightning and cause havoc for mortals. The word aegis, like Athena herself, is double-edged. You can be under the aegis of the goddess, that is, you can be under her protection, as citizens are protected by the police who wear shields, the modern version of the aegis. Odysseus was under her protection, but a protector, like a mama bear, can also be a fierce aggressor. At the climax of the Odyssey, when Odysseus has returned to Ithaca and has to fight with the suitors, the men who want to marry Penelope and usurp his kingdom, Athena at first watches the battle, taking the form of a little bird perched on the rafters. But at some point, to stop the fighting, She appears as herself and unleashes the full power of a crashing storm. So if Athena is on your side, her aegis is your protection. If she uses that power against your enemy, it is destructive. We can now look at some pictures of close-ups of the Medusa, which is an accessory to the aegis that Athena has added. The Medusa, or the Gorgon, is sometimes on the shield, the tool of war, and sometimes worn as a breastplate or as a brooch to hold the aegis together, like a symbolic shield. It's a warning, I believe. In this case, Medusa famously had snakes for hair, and the sight of her was literally petrifying. She turned men to stone. She was slain by Perseus when Athena suggested that he use his shield to reflect the Medusa so that he could behead her without actually looking at her. Perseus then gave the head to Athena. Medusa has a backstory and a place in art history. She was originally very beautiful and was either raped by or seduced by Poseidon in a temple of Athena. So it was Athena who turned her into a monster as punishment for desecrating her temple. In most images, Medusa is monstrous with the snakes for hair, but also sometimes with a snout, a pig's nose, and she always sticks out her tongue at you. I think what the Medusa and the Medusa's head and Athena are saying is beware. Do not mess with me, you weakling. In art, Medusa gets her beauty back. There's a mosaic of Medusa in Rhodes that I took a picture of. And here she is quite lovely. I found the Gorgon useful myself when I want to be let alone. And while I was working as a copy editor at the New Yorker, it was useful to me. You see, Athena turned out to be a good model for a copy editor. She wouldn't worry about offending a writer by changing one of his words or improving it. And she wouldn't worry whether a writer liked her or not. It would be the least of her worries. And she wouldn't let anyone get away with anything at the same time. So when I was worried that some personal motive was entering me as a copy editor, when I had the manuscript of some writer in my hands and I maybe felt I didn't like the writer, or maybe I felt envy of the writer, I had to resist those feelings and draw on the power of Athena in a way to make sure that my motives were pure, that I was there for the language. I didn't want to do any harm or impress anyone. And I kept a print of the Gorgon on my wall to remind me and probably to warn off anyone who came into the office. A modern, mundane version of the aegis and the Gorgon is found on our clothing, right? We wear T-shirts with slogans on them or that show our allegiance to a sports team. They carry a message. Here is an image in which Athena herself appears as an aegis. A bicycle messenger came to pick up my copy-edited manuscript of my book about Greek to take to the publisher, and he was wearing a T-shirt printed with Athena in profile. You might expect Hermes on a messenger's shirt, that's the messenger god, but I took this T-shirt of Athena as a sign that my manuscript was ready to hand over and that it had her blessing. It was very reassuring. But the greatest of Athena's roles is as an advisor, a counselor. In the Odyssey, Athena's role is to guide Odysseus, Ulysses, as well as his son, Telemachus. She appears first in the Odyssey on Ithaca. She comes as mentor. That's a mentor with a capital M, a friend whom Odysseus had entrusted the care of his family and his property to while he was away in Troy. Mentor encourages Telemachus to take action against the suitors at his father's house by traveling to get information about his father. And he creates the conditions that make it possible for Telemachus to sail to Pylos, Nestor's kingdom, and he also goes with Telemachus to Sparta to interview Menelaus and Helen. Mentor is a word that is still current in English. In fact, it has become almost debased in its overuse. There are mentoring programs at large corporations, and someone who receives mentoring is called a mentee, but its original meaning persists. A mentor is someone who helps you achieve your potential. In the Odyssey, Athena helps Odysseus get home. She is his protector. His enemy is Poseidon, who throws everything at him in his anger at Odysseus' blinding of his son, the Cyclops, Polyphemus, who lives in Sicily, forging thunderbolts for Zeus on Mount Athena. There are people in public life today who these mythological figures help to explain. To me, the Cyclops sounds like Trump in his lack of culture and empathy, though at least the Cyclops treats his sheep well and has a good method of making cheese. There may be historical precedents, but there may also be historical precedents. But the Cyclops is a good mythological one for someone who is ineducable and unrepentant. He is the opposite of Athena. Athena takes many forms in the Odyssey, among them a young girl with braids who talks to him as he is on his way to the palace of the king on his last stop, the island now identified as Corfu or Kerkyra, where he meets Nausicaa, the princess. Poseidon has shipwrecked him for the last time. So the little girl with braids, who he sees on his way to the palace, tells him, instead of going directly to the king to ask for help, to go to the queen. The queen will be more sympathetic. She'll persuade the king to help. Sometimes it's better to be indirect to get what you need, to have a strategy, to get others on your side, to get women on your side. We could see a couple images of Athena now from all over the world. One of Athena's greatest hits as a goddess of war is in the Oresteia, where she ends the cycle of revenge that ruins the house of Atreus. It's a rather harsh appearance, but still, when you compare Athena to Ares, who is the god of war, you see that Ares begins wars. Athena ends them. In the Odyssey, she resolves the war in Ithaca by saying, bury your dead, grieve, and get on with it, accept the victors. We sure could use an appearance of Athena today. That's why so much seems to depend on this little owl. Who in public life has managed to channel Athena? I think in New Zealand, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has a chance. She takes no nonsense. I voted for Hillary Clinton when she ran for president against Trump, but Hillary was more Hera than Athena, largely thanks to her husband, Bill. The late Justice of the Supreme Court, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, is probably the closest we can come to a personification of Athena today. She lasted a long time. She was a good judge. Sadly, she was not immortal. She upheld the rights of women, and she even wore the iconic collar that could have been her aegis as a justice of the Supreme Court. So it remains to be seen how things will play out in public life, whether the Cyclops will retreat howling to his beachfront property, and the ancient Biden come back from his exile and get into the White House, and whether his female Vice President Kamala Harris will bring wisdom to Washington. I hope so. And the little owl has given us all hope for a glimmer of Athena. Meanwhile, we'll edit our copy carefully. We'll deliver messages. We'll make potholders. We'll take care of our good clothes. We'll do what we can. We'll conserve our olive oil, and we'll hope for the best. Grazie. Buonasera.